there were levees that ended up failing. And it's pretty much exactly what happened in Hurricane Katrina, where all these people were displaced and had to leave all their belongings, otherwise they would get drowned. And emergency food supplies and emergency clothing did not happen. And a lot of people believe that's partially because, you know, you were helping poor people and black people. Nobody wanted to do that. And where we're going to next is where the only place people of color were actually allowed to live in, and it's because for a very long time Portland was not developed, and the Albina neighborhood was pretty much the fringes of the town. It was the fringes of the city. People lived like far east out in where it was all farmland, and then a lot of people were living in big developments on the west side. And so Albina was kind of just the place where they could store people for a while. And what they had was, back in 1919, all the realtors in the area got together and created this covenant called the Real Estate Code of Ethics. And it basically said, do not give money to black people to get homes. And so the only place that you could find a home was in the Albina neighborhood. And it was called a troubled neighborhood. Everybody thought there was gangs and crime and drugs and violence. And looking back at historical records, the statistics were pretty much equal to other areas in the region.
A lot of Harlem back east.
And so it's interesting because, you know, we just saw how a natural accident happened in Vanport, which completely destroyed a community. But the rest of this tour is really going to look at how there were intentional acts done by the city that led to the massive involuntary migration for communities of color. And so where the Veterans Memorial Coliseum is actually was a complete neighborhood. And the very first thing that happened was 999 West, which is the highway that's Broadway Bridge, came in and expanded, and they just used what's called eminent domain. They used eminent domain to buy up a bunch of this property for pennies on the dollar, and forced everybody who was there to. Some people even didn't get money back. They didn't get money. They were just told that your land needs to be used for public benefit. They need to get out. And so they built this big highway, which, you know, created congestion and polluted in the neighborhood, and there were no sidewalks, so people couldn't cross the street. And it basically just, you know, it's basically like a wall. A highway is a wall because you can't cross from one side to the other. And that was the first thing that happened. That happened in 1950. So Vanport flooded in 1948. They moved to Albina 2 years later. 99 West was built. Then following 99 West, we're going to be looking at the Rose Quarter and Veterans Memorial Coliseum. And that took a lot of area in the neighborhood. If you see how big, I don't know the acreage there, but it's probably like 2-3 acres or something. It has to do with the city and the federal government deciding where they want to build things. And they didn't want to build it in areas that they consider to be nice neighborhoods. Their excuse is, if a neighborhood is bad and it has unwanted qualities, we can therefore build something there to make it nicer. And we're actually going to be talking about in a little bit the Model Cities program. So back in the 1970s, not only were there decisions made to do development in the area that forced people to leave, but they were promoting it. They were doing expos on it. They were making sure that other people would come across the world to come see what they were doing. And so it was really beneficial for them to demonize certain neighborhoods like Albina and Sabin and Irvington a really great neighborhood that we created. If you probably can guess, this also used to be a predominant black neighborhood. And this is actually the first place that people of color were actually able to find to live, because back in 1990, the different realtors and people who were able to provide housing entered into a secret covenant that we found public records on, called the Real Estate Code of Ethics. The Real Estate Code of Ethics basically said, we're going to redline areas, make sure that no money gets directed towards people of color to buy homes in certain areas. So only in the Albina, Sabin, and Irvington neighborhoods were you actually able to find a place where people of color could live. And right after that happened, these areas started being labeled as trouble neighborhoods. They would say there was crime here, and women will get raped, and the schools were bad, and nobody worked, and all the kind of stuff. And the first thing that started happening was the development and extension of new highways. A highway is basically a big wall. If you set up 6 lanes and there's no sidewalks, there's no stop, traffic light, there's no way you can cross the street. So it completely just cleaves something in half. And so back in 1950, this is just 2 years after Vanport happened, they created 99 West, which is basically Broadway Bridge. And that was the first thing that went through the Sabin neighborhood, or Albina neighborhood. And following that, a few years later, is when they decided to develop Veterans Memorial Coliseum. And basically what they did was this practice that the local governments have called eminent domain. And eminent domain basically is taking, where you are able to take private property and use it for a public reason as long as you find a way to justify it. And so Veterans Coliseum, they justified it with maybe jobs or honoring veterans or something like that. And it basically displaced a bunch of people. And also by infusing all this amount of federal subsidy into one area, it creates around that land a desire to build more, because you can make a lot of money if you create an attraction. And so the Coliseum, hosted events. And so that made the rest of the area around it go up in land prices. And this was really an effort to make sure that this bad neighborhood was no longer bad. And you had to do that by getting rid of the people who were making the bad things happen. And so 99 West happened, and then you had Memorial Coliseum, and then in the 1960s, you see I-5 right here that we've been taking. It actually was on the west side of the city, and it was called Harbor Drive. And you had a bunch of community activists who decided to get together, and they wanted to have it buried. They wanted to tear up the highway and create this really, great esplanade where you can sit on the grass and look at the river. And they were successful, and decided to move the highway right across the street, right through the Albina neighborhood. And that created, that displaced a bunch of, black businesses who had nowhere else to go. And it tore up a bunch of different houses and whatnot. And then the problem got even worse in the 1990s when Vera Cass decided to build the interstate max line. And I know some people are really interested in what max lines look like. And I think it's fun, and it helps us transport place to place. But when it comes to public transportation, max line is by far the most expensive experiment when it comes to public transportation. It costs about $200 million for a mile of a max track. And basically, there is multi-stages when it comes to putting down a max and then also creating a community around it. And so with our zoning laws, the city and the state have basically prioritized it to make sure that there's massive amounts of development and high-density development around that, so that they want people to use it and they want it to be a valuable area, which causes all of this area to go up in rent. So all this rent got up, and people who basically lived here, they had to get up and leave. And so in combination with one highway going to the east, one highway going north, and completely just taking like an acre of land and creating a big coliseum, basically turned this into what it is now, a big gravel paved desert. And this is, I think, all we have for this stop. Does anybody have any questions?
Did these neighborhoods you mentioned also have poor white people, or was it mostly just people of color?
It was mostly people of color, but you definitely had, for example, there was a Jewish population here, and there was also an Asian population here. But it was definitely known as the only place you would find people of color. And definitely, if you were somebody who was Asian, you were a poor white person, you could get a home somewhere else. Even if it was hard for you to manage, you could live with your mom or your dad, and you could live in a nice area, in wherever you wanted in the city. There was no specific law that excluded you from getting that kind of financial support. So this is now an industrial zone. It used to be a residential area, and this is where they now have warehouses, and
So it's like where people just store their stuff.
yeah, and most likely this place is no longer to be industrial after a while. It's happened both in the Pearl District, which you guys visited. It used to be industrial, and it's happening now in our South Waterfront area, where developers want to start expanding, and they want to find a really nice place where they can ask for a tax abatement and build a bunch of expensive, because really that's the best way to make money, is by building residential areas. Here in the city of Portland, our vacancy rate is about 2%, and so people are pretty much willing to pay whatever they can for the new hip apartment next to New Seasons. And so that's a really big problem, where we're dealing with a lot of different populations that are keep getting pushed out because areas are becoming more expensive. At the same time, we're allowing developers to receive money to build housing that most people with a meager income can't afford. So that's kind of what we're dealing with now. So I think we're ready to go to the next area, which is right up the street, Dawson Park.